In this story, I'm going to tell you how my mother-in-law whispered, "You will never be one of us," then spent years quietly scripting lies to make it come true. But here's the twist. This wasn't petty gossip. It was meticulous. Voicemails, calendars, and a shoebox full of coached lines. I waited. At the family reunion, I laid out the proof and watched the woman who'd controlled everyone's story finally lose the one thing she prized most, their trust. Stay with me, and I'll show you exactly what was in that shoebox and how we used it to end her reign. I still remember the exact words my mother-in-law whispered to me the first time she thought no one was listening. She said, "You will never be one of us." If I had known then what she was planning, I would have kept my distance. My name is Evelyn Hart. I am 34 and I live in Portland, Oregon. 3 years ago, I married Jonah, my high school sweetheart, the man who makes me laugh in the rain and remembers the smallest things about me. We were young and hopeful. When I first met his mother, Miriam, she made me tea in a chipped blue mug and told me how happy she was that Jonah had found someone kind. I left that visit with a light chest and the real sense that I had been welcomed. The first crack showed up later, subtle as a hairline fracture. Jonah had an overtime shift and I stayed for dinner because Miriam insisted. After the casserole I had spent hours on, she picked up my plate, lifted the lid, and said, "I do not eat food prepared in messy kitchens. You should really learn to keep things tidy." Her voice was soft, the kind that hurts because it sounds like advice. I told myself she was tired, that mothers worry about different things, that maybe she meant well. I smiled and said, "I will try." Those words felt small and kind in the moment, but looking back, that was the first real sign. I am getting ahead of myself. I did not yet understand how carefully she would build a story about me that she could use. The whisper should have stuck with me. It followed me into other rooms. A too bright compliment at a family barbecue that carried a sting, a laugh tucked into a sentence that made a joke feel like a judgment. It was always delivered as care. She praised my embroidery and later called it quaint in the same breath, thanked me publicly for helping, and then suggested privately that I was too eager for attention. When Jonah shrugged and said, "She meant well," I learned to swallow the small cuts and smooth them out with explanations. I made excuses for Miriam the way you smooth a wrinkle into place so no one else sees it. That casual cruelty taught me restraint at first, until the pattern sharpened into something I could no longer ignore. She staged kindness like performances, warm smiles, invitations, a hand squeezed just long enough to register. Then, quietly, she rewrote moments so the record favored her. I held onto the memory of the blue mug and the kindness of that first meeting like a talisman, refusing to believe the same hands could also sculpt my undoing. I should have known it was a trap when she invited me to her book club the following week, and for the first time truly seemed nice. Instead, I went, eager to belong. That was the moment everything began to tilt. Continuing from that awkward book club, at first Miriam turned on charm like a performance. She held my hand, praised my embroidery, and told Jonah in front of everyone, "I am so glad you found someone so gentle." 2 weeks later, she called me at midnight to ask why I had not sent Jonah a casserole after his surgery, even though it was me who had driven him to the hospital. The pattern emerged slowly, and then with a clear rhythm. First incident. At Thanksgiving, she complimented my gravy in front of the family, then later told Jonah in private, "Evelyn does not understand how a proper meal is served." He shrugged and said he would talk to me, but he never did. Second incident. She praised a dessert I baked at Jonah's birthday party, then posted a picture online and captioned it, "My daughter-in-law finally made something edible," when she knew how proud I had been. Jonah confronted her for the first time. She laughed it off and said, "You know how families joke." He believed her. Third incident. She began referring to Jonah as the golden child in front of relatives and saying, "I raised him better than most." At a small dinner, she asked Jonah if he had ever considered that maybe I was holding him back from important opportunities. Her words were precise and sharp. She wanted me to feel small. I tried to win her over. I made her favorite lemon chicken, remembered her birthday, brought a hand-knitted scarf she liked. Each attempt was met with a smile for company, and then a quiet dismissal later. Jonah began to spin in the middle, torn between his loyalty to his mother and his love for me. We had the conversation every marriage counselor warns about. I told him, "Your silence feels like complicity." He said, "I do not want to hurt her." I said, "You are hurting me." A false hope arrived when Miriam called to apologize after a cousin said something about tension at a family picnic. She left a voicemail that sounded sincere. "Evelyn, I am sorry if I ever made you feel unwelcome. We want you here." For a week, things softened. I let myself believe the worst was behind us. Cliffhanger. Then at Jonah's promotion party, Miriam stood and raised her glass with a smile, and she said something that made the room go very quiet. What she said next changed everything. The apology had been a calculated pause. At the promotion party, Miriam stood, and in a voice practiced to sound owning and generous, she said, "We are so proud of Jonah, especially because he did not let his ridiculous choices ruin the family." She looked straight at me and added, "Some people do not understand boundaries the way we do." My chest dropped. Whispers rippled through the room. Cousins I had hugged earlier turned their faces away. Jonah stood frozen, his face the color of someone caught between a shout and a silence. Miriam had spread a story that painted me as a selfish interloper who cared more for attention than for family. That night, Jonah sat me down and said, "I heard things from Mom. She told me you badmouthed my sister and that you tried to control her at the baby shower." I could hear how his voice splintered when he tried to repeat the accusations. I told him exactly what I had done that week, the favors I had done for the family, the small kindnesses, and he looked at me as if he was trying to reconcile two different people in front of him. The fallout was immediate. Family texts demanded explanations. Jonah's sister stopped answering messages, and Miriam began calling Jonah for long, late conversations that left him exhausted. I felt completely alone for the first time in my life. I thought about leaving, about packing a bag and heading to the coast by myself. My hands shook as I made coffee in the dark. Then a message came from an old neighbor of Miriam's, a woman named Rosa who used to babysit Jonah. She sent a single line. "I remember how your mother-in-law treated my daughter the same way 10 years ago. You are not the only one." Suddenly, I had a strand of hope. I replayed moments I had brushed off. Miriam's pointed compliments, the way she staged praise mid-meal, the offhand tips to Jonah about who was reliable. It clicked that nothing she did was casual. Everything was performance. But there was a ticking clock. Jonah's parents were planning to host a big family reunion where Miriam would surely be surrounded by every relative she used as an audience. I had to decide whether to stay silent or to prepare to show everyone who Miriam really was. I pictured the reunion hall, the threaded conversations, the elders who believed Miriam by instinct. I imagined Jonah's disbelief turning to understanding or fracture. Fear pushed me toward retreat. Anger pushed me toward exposure. In the end, I could not accept being erased. I would not let a rehearsed apology overwrite years of small cruelties. I made my decision. I chose to gather quiet proof, not to create a spectacle. The turning point came the week I found a shoebox beneath Miriam's spare bed when I had gone there to return a family photo she had asked for. Inside were notes, calendars with visits circled, and little scripts of things to say at gatherings. One page read, "Shift the blame gently, never use the word liar, always say I am worried about them around other people." It was meticulous. My breath jumped when I realized it was not just spite, it was strategy. I began to collect other pieces. Rosa came forward and said, "She did this to my girl when she married Rosa's son." A cousin admitted that Miriam coached stories to fit a narrative. I saved every voicemail where Miriam praised me publicly, then later in private dismissed me. I asked for help from a marriage counselor who provided guidance on how to present this not as revenge, but as evidence of a pattern. Jonah, at first, recoiled when I showed him Miriam's scripts. He said, "She is my mother." We argued until midnight about loyalty and truth. Then, in a small, fierce moment, Jonah looked at me and said, "I do not want to lose you to my fear of hurting her." That line felt like a rope thrown across an empty alley. We decided to confront Miriam at the upcoming family reunion where the elders, including Jonah's aunt and his grandmother, would be present. The preparation was painstaking. We printed timelines, text threads, and wrote out exactly what each witness would say. There was a late night when doubt almost dissolved me. What if revealing this breaks the family forever? I lay awake and pictured a life where I could not forgive myself for staying quiet. I imagined Jonah's face if he learned later that I had known and done nothing. I pictured Miriam in the chair she favored, shaping people's opinions like a seamstress shaping cloth, and I felt anger mixed with pity. In the morning, I called Rosa, who replied, You are doing the right thing. You are not the angry one. You are the patient one. We had exactly 24 hours before everyone gathered. 24 hours to decide if we would reveal the truth. The reunion hall smelled of candles and coffee, a place where every chair had witnessed 1,000 small rituals. Miriam arrived in a coral dress that made her look like she had not aged, smiling at people she had coaxed into alliance. I felt my palms sweating as the first speeches began. Jonah squeezed my hand and mouthed, "Are you ready?" I nodded. The plan was simple. Let the family see the timeline, hear the witnesses, and watch Miriam try to redirect. We started with small things that everyone would remember. The time Miriam announced at Thanksgiving that she had loaned Jonah money, but then told him he had to return it without receipts, the voicemail where she thanked me in public for helping, and then the night at the promotion party when she called me the source of trouble. Each testimony landed with a thud. Faces shifted. People who had been warm to Miriam now looked hunted. Then Jonah called Rosa forward. She spoke with a voice that trembled but did not break. When my daughter married into this family, she was broken down. Miriam told her she was lucky to be acceptable. She told stories about my girl to make her doubt herself. I watched as a ripple of recognition moved through the room. More memories surfaced, small, precise scenes. A birthday greeting edited to sound caustic, a casserole compliment turned into a late-night criticism, a quiet warning given to a cousin that made them distance themselves from me. Each detail fit like a tile in a mosaic. Miriam tried to smile, to apologize, to say she had been misunderstood, but when confronted with the shoebox scripts and the text messages, she fumbled. The room was quiet long enough that you could hear the clock. Miriam's expression changed from control to panic. The elders asked questions, and her responses became smaller, less certain. Jonah's aunt, who had been Miriam's friend for decades, stood up and said, "I did not know you did this, Miriam. I thought you were helping." A cousin turned toward the doorway as if remembering a luncheon where Miriam had skewed a story. An uncle who had been Miriam's defender bit his lip and looked down. Miriam's voice finally broke as she said, "I only wanted to protect the family." Her justification was the cruelest thing. She believed her manipulation was a form of love. Jonah turned to me and said, "I am so sorry. I should have seen it." I reached out and took his hand. His apology was small but real, a salve on a wound that had been left open by years of quiet gaslighting. The fallout was immediate. Some relatives apologized with tearful regret. Others who had been on Miriam's side crossed their arms and left. Miriam sat down, and in her face I saw the full weight of what she had built and then lost. For a moment, she looked not like the orchestrator, but like a woman who had misread every mirror in her life. Cliffhanger, Miriam reached out to Jonah that night and begged him not to tell anyone the truth. She said there would be consequences. What she did not know was that consequences had already begun to unfold. After the reunion, the consequences were not dramatic punishments. They were the slow, inevitable unraveling of a reputation built on manipulation. Miriam lost invitations she had relied on. Two close friends stopped inviting her for lunch, saying they felt misled. Jonah, for the first time, set a boundary. He told her, "You cannot speak about Evelyn like that anymore." She cried, she apologized, she tried to explain that she had been shaped by fear. I remember sitting on our porch the first night after everything, the rain making soft music on the roof, and Jonah leaning his head against mine and saying, "We did it." I felt relief, but also grief for what had been broken. I also remembered small details that now felt sharp. The way Miriam's perfume once filled the car when she drove us to a funeral, the chipped teacup she kept on the mantel, the photograph she would point to and say, "See, this is the family you join." Those things turned from comforting to evidence of an artful performance. People who had been allies to Miriam now hesitated to speak for her. Some family members issued apologies directly to me. Jonah's sister wrote, "I was wrong to listen without asking." She visited us, and we had a long, awkward lunch where she said the words I needed to hear. There were no legal consequences, no public shaming, just the natural outcome of her actions. Fewer friends, cooler invitations, and a new distance that she had only herself to blame for. Months later, Miriam reached out again. Her messages were smaller, more humble. "Evelyn, can we talk?" I wrote back once. "I will meet and we can set terms for being in each other's lives, but respect is required." She showed up, and for the first time she listened without trying to edit the story to her advantage. It was slow, imperfect. Jonah and I learned how to rebuild trust and to set firm lines that protected our marriage. The new chapter has been quieter in a good way, Saturday mornings making pancakes without the shadow of drama, small trips to the coast where we do not talk about family politics, and the sense that our home is ours. The real karma was not revenge. It was that Miriam had to face the thing she valued most, affection, and realize she had pushed it away with her own hands. I spent evenings cataloging memories to understand how long this had been happening. A birthday card with a crossed-out note, a voicemail clipped just before the apology, the way invitations arrived with comments that later tightened into accusations. A final moment of closure came when Jonah's grandmother, who had watched the entire unraveling, called Miriam and said, "You lost some things because you chose a story over someone you loved." Miriam did not argue. She simply wept. Months later, she invited us to a small dinner, and I declined with calmness, not malice. I had grown past needing her acceptance to define me. In the end, I learned that standing up for yourself does not make you a villain. It makes you someone who protects the people you love. The life Jonah and I are building now is stronger for it, and when Miriam is ready to be honest, we will consider her. Until then, the quiet peace in our home is the true victory. Several months after the reunion, Miriam posted a short note on social media about loneliness and learning. I did not comment. I was busy living my life, and for the first time in years that felt enough.